do I have value? Or is it they want to go to Elvis's house?
The thing that I really learned from this book, or became completely cognizant of, is the fact that she was so close to her dad.
The loss of him kind of dictated her whole life, and not the Elvis part, like the loss of that bond. I always knew she was in grief. Could feel that from a very young age, that there was sadness there. We loved going to Graceland because my mom's version of Graceland that she still liked to create for us was this place where she felt wild and free. And addiction has had a huge part in both the loss of my brother and my mom. That experience kind of led her to this place of kind of hopelessness.
Riley, I'm so happy to kind of meet you over our laptops.
I'm so happy to kind of meet you too. Thank you for having me.
I've been wanting to get you on the podcast for so long. I just adored your performance in Daisy Jones. I thought you were mesmerising.
Thank you.
And you just, I was such a fan of the book. We've had Taylor on the podcast and I'm just in awe of her writing. I think she's incredible. But you guys brought so much magic to the screen. Did it feel like that on set when you were filming it, that you were doing something special?
It was really fun. So I don't know what that means, but it was just like, especially the rehearsal time we had together. It was like, it felt like we weren't at work, and it felt kind of like we'd show up every day and, go to rehearsal and I guess like, yeah, it just had this feeling of like just going to hang out with friends. And I would constantly find myself like feeling like I wasn't doing enough work because it felt so fun, So yeah, it was really special. And a lot of the people who I got to work with, I had a really great time with. And I think that we got really lucky with our cast, in that like all of us were very like selfless and like giving actors to one another. And I think that that's pretty uncommon with so many people. There's bound to be one person who's a little bit, I don't know, like has a different process. But I would say for the most part, like we were all just nice people, and I think that goes a long way.
Oh my God, it certainly does, especially when you're doing something new and something that everyone's going to watch. You want it to be enjoyable.
Yeah, and I think in that way, like none of us had ever done anything like this, so we were all kind of having the same experience. Like I had never sang, Sam had never sang. A lot of the guys on the show like had played music, but not like in years. So it felt like this, like there was room to mess up and no pressure in a way, and that part was really fun.
Oh, it's just so good. I might have to, I think over Christmas I'm just going to watch it all again. I've sort of missed it.
You should. Watch it again.
It's just so joyful. I loved it. And obviously you've been with Taylor recently because she's been interviewing you on your book tour dates, right?
She did the LA live talk, which was so much fun. And she texted me before and she was like, I'm just going to try and keep it, light if possible, because a lot of the stuff in the book is heavier. And I really appreciated that, because it gets really draining talking about, your personal trauma all day. So I just thought that was like really thoughtful of her and it was really fun. Like we were able to have a really fun conversation. And actually Sam was there from Daisy Jones, and randomly he texted me and was like, can I come? So he was just sitting.
That's so nice.
So he was just sitting right in the front row, and I felt like we were back doing Daisy Jones press. It was really funny.
That's so nice. But it's so beautiful, and it's, testament to that experience you guys had on set, that you're all friends and you want to hang out and support each other. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. This book, which we've just touched on, I just found it just felt like a privilege to read it. And I think it's for all the reasons that you've just mentioned. It is incredibly personal and raw and at times unbelievably honest, which is, they're all the ingredients to make a good book, I suppose. But I just raced through it. I thought it was so beautifully done. And this, of course, was a book that your mum had she'd reached out to you before she died and said, I need help with my story. I can't quite collate the stories and get them together to form this book. How was that for you at that point? Because it's quite a rare thing that a mum and daughter or father and son or whatever get to sit down and really look over someone's life like that. I haven't done that with my mum, and I have regret about not doing that with, say, my grandparents, because, there's all these brilliant stories that haven't been unearthed, and you don't get to learn who your parents are necessarily outside of the role that they hold as a mum or a dad. What was that like for you?
Well, first of all, it's something I keep telling people, to ask their parents to, record your parents telling their story, because there's so much you don't know. And I mean, in my case, there wasn't so much I didn't know, but it's a really special thing to have, when they pass away, in terms of your family's history. And I just felt really blessed to have 16 tapes of her going through her entire life, from birth until present day. And I mean, the timing of it was really strange. She asked me to help her finish the book in December, and she died in January. So it was really bizarre timing. And it was very odd. We had a phone call with her and her manager, and we were basically talking about what she wanted from the book and what she felt where she was getting stuck. And basically she felt that, I think she just didn't like talking about herself, honestly, and just felt a bit over it, and kind of I don't want to, I don't see the part. She lost sort of the reason why she started, writing it and talking about herself. And she was very shy and had low self-esteem. And so I think that she wanted somebody else to kind of, what she said was, you know me better than I know myself. Can't you help me? Can't you write it? And I was like, of course I'll help you. Not thinking that she would die a few weeks later, So that was, of course, on my mind when she passed away. And it was a really intense process, because it was shortly after she died, a couple months, I got these tapes from the book, because I basically just was being sent everything when she died of hers from people that they had of hers, her records, her songs, her, everyone was kind of sending me everything, going, you should have this. And in that process, the unfinished book was a part of the things she kind of hadn't finished that I was, I don't know, thinking with, I guess. And I got sent the tapes, and they were just, it was very hard to listen to them to start. But once I started, it was really therapeutic and nice, because it felt like she was in the room, or I was on the phone with her, after listening for 35 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour. So it was a really unique experience, because I think often when people lose their parents or loved ones, you have some videos, these short little videos to watch, or voicemails, or, and especially now, because we don't, in the 90s, you'd video the whole Christmas morning on your camcorder, but now we just video these little clips. So I found that with my brother, because my brother passed away too, where I just had these little clips of him, and I would just hold on, I would just watch them over and over again, because they're so tiny, and with her, I just had so much of her talking. And so it was really special. And I knew that I was really lucky to have that. And then I basically just started laying her story out, and to me it felt like the only way to fill in the gaps that were missing was me doing it. And I wasn't going to pretend that I was her. So I thought, I just have to do it in my own voice. And it wasn't necessarily something I wanted to do. Like, I don't like attention on myself, and I don't like kind of, the way she raised me, I'll say, was to not do something like this, to not kind of go out in the press. And like, she was very private. So I think her desire to write the book was after experiencing a lot of suffering and wanting to, an addiction and loss, and really wanting to like help people, and feeling like, well, if I've experienced, what's the point of experiencing all this if I can't share my story and connect with people, and though she's in a unique circumstance where she's Elvis's daughter, it's a very human story, and the themes are very human, and it's about, loneliness and love and loss and grief and addiction and having children and, very relatable things. So back to me writing the book. It was hard. I was resistant to doing it because just the idea of me like writing an autobiography just felt so out of character for me, honestly. So it was a bit uncomfortable, but it was kind of the only way to do it, was to insert myself into the story.
Yeah, I found your parts utterly fascinating because, of course, you've got an entirely different perspective, and you're seeing your mum go through certain circumstances and the impact of that for everybody. I thought there were beautiful additions to the story, and really gave a really full-bodied sense of who she was. You've said this a moment ago, and you talk about it in the book. You say that you kind of spent your whole life trying to work out why she had this profound sense of low self-esteem and unworthiness. Do you think, from perhaps listening to the tapes, perhaps the process of actually getting it on paper, that you're anywhere closer to working out why?
I think there's a few more clues that I have. I think that from the minute she was born, people had agendas with her in their friendships and relationships, which would kind of make someone go, do they want to hang out with me? Like, do I have value? Or is it they want to go to Elvis's house, And I can tell you from my own life experience that that's something I've experienced too. Like, I definitely as a child would have a lot of experiences where kids would kind of say, can we go to your house? Like, is your mom there? Is Michael Jackson there? Like, that was a lot of my childhood. So I can understand the feeling of like, is my friendship of any worth to you? Am I of any worth, or am I just this whatever kind of thing? So I think that had to do with it. And then along with the fact that she kind of was born into crazy amounts of fame and on the cover of newspapers since literally the day she was born. And the headlines were pretty, cruel a lot of her life, especially in her teen years and later in her life, in the 90s too, like 80s and 90s. It was pretty brutal the way that magazines would talk about women. And like, I remember as a child going to the grocery store and seeing these awful headlines like Lisa Marie, photos of her saying she was fat and saying, Lisa Marie's headed towards the grave, like these big headlines, like Lisa Marie's going to end up like her dad, overweight and losing her mind, like just on drugs, like when she wasn't on drugs at all, like just really awful things to look at yourself, to see every day. And when I say every day, I mean every day. Like that was the 90s and the early 2000s. Like it was every single day in the stores. It was right there. And so I think that would make you definitely insecure. And I think that she just didn't also have a lot of really close relationships in her life. She didn't have a lot of truly like deep friendships and relationships, to, you know, obviously it's ideal that we don't need that to feel our own self-worth, but I think that for her, like, I think there was almost like none of it, you know? So I think that she didn't really have anyone saying like, you're amazing, until she was older and, you know, with my dad and some relationships she had, but I don't think she had this. Yeah. So I don't know the one, I don't think there's one reason. I think it was just a lot of things that made her, you know, insecure.
Yeah, I mean, it's an extraordinary life from day
Yeah.
one. There's not much normalcy there at all, and she's just having to cope and learn each day how
Mm-hmm.
to survive in that sort of environment. And I guess the thing that I really learned from this book, or became completely cognizant of, is the fact that she was so close to her dad. And I think, you know, you get an inkling of that just from knowing the story and the history of Elvis and the family dynamics. But it seemed like they had this inextricable bond, and that really, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this, that she never actually really got over his death. It was sort of with her every day.
Definitely. His death, you know, when I look back, the loss of him kind of dictated her whole life, and not the Elvis part, like the loss of that bond, with her father. And she, I remember, like, I felt like I was born, like, I felt like since I always knew she was in grief. You know, I could feel that from a very young age, that there was sadness there. And it was her, in her eyes, the most like meaningful relationship other than her children that she had. And kind of this person who was there to guide her through this crazy life of hers, she felt, who left. And she felt very alone. So yes, I think they had an incredibly deep and meaningful bond. And I think that she was always looking for closeness to him throughout her life. And I don't think she really processed it either. You know, I think that she didn't talk about it as much as she probably should have. And I think that a reason for that was because she was always asked about it. And I think that always being asked about it in the press and people wanting to know kind of her response to that was a sort of like, I don't know, she would feel, I think she would feel irritated when people would ask her about it, because there was so much of it. But then she also didn't, because of that, she didn't really feel, you know, safe or comfortable talking about it. So I think it was like this thing she wanted to keep private to herself, but she kept it so private that she wasn't able to really process it, maybe.
I guess when someone of that stature dies, it's almost like there's this public grief, which is a whole other very unusual flavour of grief, where it's not just about the people that are directly impacted. It's the fans, it's the people who have followed that individual for a long time, and their outpouring of grief can be very loud, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't imagine how you would deal with that, you know, sort of rallying alongside your own experience of grief and that personal loss of, it's not Elvis, it's my dad, it's my guiding light, it's that person that's gone. And I'm imagining that was just utterly confusing. And, you know, and she was a child, she was a tiny kid. It's so much to deal with. In the book, you both talk quite frequently about Graceland, and that being a place where your mum really did get some comfort of being in the surroundings that were sort of left as they had been after Elvis died, and her crawling into his bed and feeling that sort of sense of closeness to him. Obviously, you didn't get to meet your maternal grandfather, but he's very much a part of your story and your blood and your lineage. What was that like for you as a kid, going to Graceland and sort of, I guess, maybe being even more acutely aware of that grief, but also having that sense of closeness to who he was?
We loved going to Graceland because my mom's version of Graceland that she still liked to create for us was this place where she felt wild and free and connected to, she actually felt very connected to her father there, and it wasn't a place of sadness at all for her. She would always visit his grave, but mostly it was a place where she felt close to her dad, and like, you know, like you would feel walking into your childhood home. My childhood home doesn't exist anymore, but I dream about it all the time. And when I dream about it, there's this great sense of like comfort in that place. You know, I lived there from 5 years old, or 4 or 5 years old, to 21. And I think that that's what she felt there. Like that, like deep security of the childhood home feeling, and like that her connection to him was really strong there. And then she would also like go there and get on the golf carts and, you know, this is until she died, literally, like run wild and free on the lawn, and connect to that part of herself, the younger part of herself. And I think she really felt like whole there. So we had a really good time there because it was always fun. Like our experience was going to Graceland, and, you know, we wouldn't really go in the house when the tours were going on, but we would go after and have dinner and see our family there. And, you know, we could feel her joy there and how much fun she would have. And when we were younger, it was like riding around on the golf carts and eating banana pudding. And then as we got older, it was like having a drink in the living room and dancing. And, you know, so it was always a place of joy, you know, for all of us until my brother passed away. And then he was buried there. And then I think all of our relationships changed with the property because it just became a place of grief, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's a hard, very jarring turn to have to take from it being somewhere that, you know, is joy-filled and there's wild abandon to, God, this is now actually a tangible place of grief. That's, yeah. How do you navigate that? That's full on.
Yeah. To be honest, when my brother was buried there, it was really hard for me to go there. My mom would go all the time because she felt a sense of closeness when she would sit in the meditation garden, probably because she was used to it with her dad her whole life, you know? And I think I didn't realize until my brother was buried there and she was buried there, like how polarizing that experience would have been every time she went. Like, because I'd never really experienced grief. I really felt like I understood her experience of Graceland more, having my loved ones buried there. But for me, it was hard to go. For her, she felt like sitting there in the meditation garden with my brother's body or grave and her dad's grave and her grandparents' graves. Like she found that comforting, whereas I didn't really totally have that experience. But you know what? Like once I'm there, I feel happy to be there. It's just like getting up and going that I always feel, you know, apprehensive about. But I also want the relationship to Graceland and the home, because it's so special, to keep the like sort of life and wildness that it had for me, like for my kids and for my sisters. So I do try and bring that when I am there. Like I like to go with friends, with family, so it feels like alive and we spend time in the house. So I'm working on sort of recreating that relationship for my kids and yeah.
Well, it's still, you know, it's fresh. It's not like it happened 20 years ago. You know,
exactly.
You're in the thick of it, and it's you know, it's a long, slow process, isn't it, to change those narratives and for time to somewhat be a healer. Although, of course, it's not a linear experience necessarily, but
yeah.
I mean, you talk in the book about, your brother died extremely young. He took his own life. Your mum and brother had an incredibly intense bond. And then after that loss, you did start to have a bit of fear that your mum might not stick around. Is that something that you had to really land on? Or was that a thought that you would try and push away because it just felt just too ghastly to imagine that would perhaps be the end of her?
I think a lot of my life has been like a lesson in letting things be what they are and not being able to change what is. So by the time that he passed and she was living, I would say that I was more, I always have done what I can do, and there's a point where you have to just kind of surrender to what is. And I just knew from being close with my mom that the idea of losing a child was a concept that she like deeply feared. She talked about it often throughout my life. She couldn't watch movies with parents losing children. She couldn't. She had friends who lost children, and she would say, I wouldn't make it. I will never make it through something like that if something like that happened to me. So I just kind of knew because of what she'd said and what I'd seen and their closeness and the fact that he was kind of like her baby. And I just didn't see a way. I definitely didn't see a way for her to live and be like, to keep going and for her to be happy, What she started to do was just accept that she was living in grief. And so I kind of saw a way forward for her in that way, but she definitely was not like, in many ways she would say like, my life is over when I lost my son. That's it for me. Like, I'm here for my children, but I don't want to be here, which is fair enough. Losing a child is the worst thing that can happen to you. So I don't know, but I was also open to her totally turning things around. And, I tried not to have expectations, to be honest, but I definitely, the moment he died, I kind of thought, there's no way she's going to survive this. That was my instinct. And I think everyone around's instinct.
Yeah, it's too big.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it's just incredibly, incredibly sad. Do you know what I found so extraordinary reading the book was how, and I've obviously never met you, but I know enough about you from researching you and from reading your own thoughts in this book that you seem like an incredibly sturdy and responsible person who at times has had to hold together a lot of pieces of the family, or the dynamic, or the emotions, or the grief, or whatever. And I guess piecing that together with looking at, when you talk about your memories of being at Graceland, of reading Elvis's books on the shelves that were usually spiritual books, and you could tell very much that he's searching for something, and that your mother had that desire to search for some sort of comfort or something else to help her through. And I wonder how you feel sort of looking back on that lineage. And, we can all do it. I've got a series on my mother's side of pretty poor mental health, and you can kind of look back and see how this filters through the family. But there can be, of course, family members in the lineage that break the chain, that do things differently for whatever reason. And I wonder if you feel like that, if you have broken the chain, and if that's been something that you've had to give thought to, or you're not an addict, you're not in that headspace where that's going to be a path for you.
I think that like it's giving me a lot of credit saying I broke the chain, because I was never an addict, and I think that addiction, whether it's straightforward or not, has had a huge part in both the loss of my brother and my mom. And with my mom, it was different. But I think that, ultimately that experience kind of led her to this place of kind of hopelessness, And so I think that the place she was in, the sort of hopelessness she lived in, was due to the years of addiction. And I think that had she not been in that situation, I think a lot of things would have been different for her and for my brother. So I do blame addiction for a lot of the sort of the trauma and the loss. And I wasn't like, I never have been an addict. So I think that it's giving me too much credit saying I've broken a chain when I never had that issue to deal with, I hope my children don't have addiction issues, but I don't know how it works. I don't know, like, there's so many theories about why, people have addiction issues or mental health issues. And I think that for me, like, something that, like, I think that mental, like, experiencing depression, experiencing pain, experiencing suffering is part of being in this world, So I always feel hesitant to be like, of course there's mental health issues, but sometimes the phrasing of it bothers me, because I'm like, of course, if you've got somebody in pain and suffering, they're going to suffer, and it's, and the phrasing of it sometimes sounds like something's wrong with them fundamentally. And I hate that. I think that people experience trauma and generational trauma and pain, and it's hard to live in this world. It's a really complicated world. And people are so sensitive. And so I think that it's much more complicated than we understand. And so it's hard for me to really speak to, generational trauma. With that said, there's definitely generational trauma in my family. And, my mother's father came from addiction and poverty. And I think those things are in your body for sure. I just think that, and of course there's a lot of support now for those things that there weren't back then. So yeah, I don't know. I think that, like, taking on the sort of like responsibility of breaking the chain of my whole lineage feels like intense. But I hope and pray that there's, no more addiction, but there might be. I think that what I've learned in my life is to not really, like, have expectation, and to kind of just ride the waves, Yeah.
That's all we can do, isn't it? That's literally all we can do. I mean, there'll be plenty of people listening to this now who are either in the depths of grief, who have lost someone recently, who have had, a succession of loss this year, wondering how the hell you navigate life, because it's not something you get over. It's something that you learn to live alongside. How would you say you've coped, or maybe there's been times when you haven't, but how are you navigating it? Because I think when you're in it, it can feel completely lonely and like nobody really understands, and the world keeps spinning, and people are just going about their daily business, but you're in this thing that is so all-consuming. How have you navigated it, especially with your mum and brother, passing so close to each other?
Well, I think that grief is something that changes all the time, and you think you've got like a relationship with it, and then it changes. I think that there's early grief, which is just agony, and then a year in, you start to feel like, I'm making up this timeline, or it's relative to me, but you start to feel like, okay, like I see that I can sort of live my life and also hold this sadness. And then you have moments of joy and moments where things feel kind of normal. And then you find yourself feeling like it just happened yesterday, so it's always changing. And I think it's like being okay with the change, which is really uncomfortable. in life in general, and allowing it to, I think for me, like, I know nothing ever stays the same, and I find comfort in that. I think that can sound uncontrollable for some people, but I think that the idea that emotions change, everything changes, is like comforting to me. That this, if this is a hard moment, it will pass, and there will be great moments. Great moments will also pass, and then there will be hard moments. So I think I just, again, try and just ride the wave. But one thing I definitely do is I feel it. I don't run away from it. I don't like sit in like agony, and like if there's a way to feel relief, I feel relief. But I definitely won't. Like if I have a moment where I feel emotional, I'll let myself cry or feel my feelings. I think feeling your feelings is probably the right thing to do. I think
without a doubt. Oh my God, I think in every single circumstance, and we're not we're not used to doing it, and we're certainly not taught to do that. If anything, I think a common way to get brought up by any parent is that when a kid's crying or a toddler, that the parent's going, oh no, don't, like, shush, don't do the crying bit. And
I know
we're sort of conditioned that we should, and then obviously just through social conditioning that you're not either laughing hysterically or weeping in the supermarket or on the bus or whatever, that you have to keep it all in. And actually
I think
it's
that's
so damaging.
I guess that's what I was getting at when I was saying that mental illness, sometimes the broad term bugs me when people are talking about depression or anxiety or these feelings that are valid,
Yeah.
Like we're not meant to just be happy 24/7. Like that's not the world we live in. So I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, is that like there's so much conditioning to not cry, to not feel angry, to not feel bad, negative, any emotions at all. And I think that pushing through that in grief has probably been the most beneficial to me. And I think that's just because when I do like try and push through or bottle it up, it results in like crazy anxiety or something else. Like it'll find another way to manifest, So I think that I think it's like not judging your emotions, your human emotions. Of course, if they're so severe, then you need to get help. But I think that like the way we're so hard on ourselves for having a moment of depression, having a few weeks of being anxious, having a panic attack, like how could we not, when we live in this wild place and we're having this crazy experience? So I try and give myself grace for my feelings, because by no means am I this like perfectly level-headed individual. Like I'm a human and I feel a lot,
Yeah. Do you know what? I think there's such a link, and I've really experienced this one this year specifically, the link between suppressing anger and anxiety. And I had no clue about this before. And I saw this brilliant, I've been seeing this brilliant therapist this year, and I was having all sorts of crazy anxiety and panic attacks for years and years and years. And she was like, I think if you really, really got in touch with what you're angry about and you really felt it, then you would not have this anxiety. And I was like, what a load of shit, but I'm sure. And then this year have worked really specifically on that. I haven't had a panic attack in probably nearly a year, like not one, because I'm just feeling that. And I think especially for women, like feeling anger is such a no-no for some reason.
For women,
I don't know,
and you're British, like you're totally.
And I'm British. I'm fucked.
No, I think that's. I actually saw like Gabor Mate say something about that, like how women, and it makes total sense to me. I think that there's a lot of anger and rage, even with your parents, with your school teacher, like with whoever, your partners, and females are not really conditioned to feel those things. Even in my household, like if I was to yell at my mom as a kid, and this is also just a generational thing, she was an amazing mother, she would have been like, don't you dare talk to me like that,
Oh yeah.
Whereas now it's like, let them be angry, let them feel, but that was parenting, and I think that so definitely there's a lot of, I think, repressed. I've also felt that, like repressed anger leading to anxiety for sure, or repressed sadness, repressed anger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Repressed anything. We just got to let it out. I think
Exactly.
it's so, and giving yourself the time and space and just to let yourself feel a bit shit or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's underestimated how powerful that can be. And I think it's really beautiful advice for people that are in it now to not try and rush the process or get to the other side. It's like you have to be in it, whatever it is, if it's loss or anger or whatever, just to be in it rather than to bypass it, because you kind of can't. If anything,
You
you're
can't.
probably delaying the whole thing. You're probably delaying
For
the whole
sure.
thing.
And I think that's really the thing, is like your suppressing of emotions, like it's going to come at some point. So it's, I think, a little bit of the only way out is through, in a sense.
Yeah, without a doubt. The other thing I've found really beautiful in the book is your mum and dad's relationship, because, you know, after they broke up and your mum got remarried and had different partners, your dad was always about, and it was just a really lovely sort of beautiful partnership that they seemed to keep throughout your mum's entire life. What was that for you as a child? What was that like? Or was just a young person growing up knowing that, you know, they weren't together, but they actually had a really incredible partnership going on?
As a child, my perception of my parents for a long time, like into my late teens, early 20s, was that I had the most amazing, wildly colorful, sort of eccentric, incredible, like, parents. Like, and they were. I don't want to say that changed, but I think things got a little more like intense in my 20s. And so I just felt lucky. Like, I always felt lucky. I remember as a child feeling so lucky that my dad was my dad and my mom was my mom, like, and my life was my life. Like, I really felt grateful. I remember moments of being in the bathroom and going, God, I'm so lucky. Like, what did I do to be this lucky? And I don't know why I felt so lucky. I think I just felt like real love and unconditional love. And I just loved them so much. And I think that that's surprisingly unique, in a family. So maybe I just knew that, I guess, as a child, but I felt lucky for their relationship. He was always around, you know. I said in the book, but I didn't even know that the Michael Jackson situation had upset my dad until I could see he was, you know, he came back from this one trip and I heard a phone call, but they were so, they really prioritized, which it was not like a big thing in the 90s, you know, like conscious uncoupling or whatever.
Yeah.
Like they were doing that, like, probably before anybody.
They beat Gwyneth and Chris. They beat them.
And so I just felt like I knew I had a unique situation, because I also had friends who didn't have that, you know, dynamic with divorced parents. And when I would tell people, like, my dad lives with us, often people would kind of go, what? You know, I'd be like, oh yeah, my dad lives in the guest house and my stepdad lives in the house and they're all going on tour together. And I think
it's great.
And but I was aware of it. You know, I think that something I've felt really lucky for in my life is I'm always aware of the good moments, and like I've never found myself looking back going, God, I wish I appreciated that more, you know, because I always felt really grateful.
How beautiful. I love that so much. And it's also intriguing in the book, you know, your mum's incredibly honest about her relationship with Michael Jackson, and they seemed to really connect on a level that, you know, it's sort of unbelievable how there was maybe a mirror held up to each other and they just connected in that way. What do you think it was? What were they giving each other in that moment? Because it was very quick, it was very intense. They were completely in love with each other. What was that dynamic about?
I think that there were a lot of things they related on. Firstly, you know, they were both living these like very isolated lives in these sort of ivory towers, and it's a really unique experience. So I think that when you're living that way, it's also hard to really trust people and connect with people when everybody around you is wanting something from you. And so I think there was a comfort in going in that. They both kind of were living that experience. They both knew what it was like to leave the house and have this sort of circus that would follow them. Like, it was a very similar lived experience. So I think that there was that. And then there was also just like a human connection. She just fell in love with him. My mom was somebody who could not live her life inauthentically, like in any moment of her life, to a point where it would make people extremely uncomfortable. If she didn't like something, she wouldn't go. If she didn't like somebody, she would leave. If she didn't like her husband, she would get divorced. Like, I think that I understand as an adult that there was like question around like whether or not that it was like a PR thing. And, that's just like, there's no, anyone who knows my mom knows that she'd be completely incapable of that. So she fell in love with him. It was pretty straightforward, I think
I'm so inspired by everything you've just. I want to basically be everything you've just said. Like, I want to like not waste time. Like, life is short. I don't want to waste time doing shit I don't want to do and hang out with people I don't want to hang out with. Like, how do you get there? How do you do that?
I don't know. She just was maybe born that way, and it was like and I think that quality is so admirable, though it would make people uncomfortable a lot. She just never lived a moment in any sort of lie or micro lie, or how are you? Good. She wouldn't say good if she wasn't good, And so I think there's something to be learned there in that sort of level of like living authentically, for sure, and honestly.
Yeah, I think we're all so nervous to make people feel uncomfortable, or for people not like us. We don't like that feeling, and I'm always so sort of magnetized towards people that do not care. They don't care. They're just themselves. I find it's the most tantalizing quality.
It is. And I think it's funny because she was insecure and she wanted friends and she wanted to fall in love and to be loved, but she also did not care if people didn't like her. And I think that was really liberating to live that way.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think, everything in the book, every story, every gap that you filled in just is so demonstrative of how wonderfully complex she was, like we all are, that you can be both. You can be vulnerable and insecure, but very, very certain as to who you are and how you want to live in certain ways. And it's I just loved it. I loved reading the book so much, and I can't even imagine how tough it was at times. And like you said at the start of this, even doing these chats is fucking draining, and you have to go over stuff that's really painful. So I'm deeply appreciative of your time today, and it's just been so lovely to talk to you. Thank you so much, Riley.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful, and I hope you have a good evening, day.